After a very intensive day yesterday. So today I'm here to introduce the track 3 first presenters, Bhramara Joshi and Rahul Balaji. They are both working as assistant tech editors in TIPCO, which is a business unit of Cloud Software Group. I'll just give you a brief introduction of what they are doing. Bhramara Joshi is a technical editor with editing expertise in domains like healthcare, IT, publishing, marketing. And Rahul Balaji has over 6+ years of experience. He started as instructional designer and then has moved on to tech writing. They are both employed with TIPCO, a business unit of Cloud Software Group. So a little bit about the session. I will not take too much of their sentences away. So just to give you a glimpse of what we are going to talk about, we all know that AI is slowly the buzzword that is catching up. And it is a trend. As it is a trend in technical writing, technical editing also is no exception, right? With AI entering all sections, it will infiltrate everything. We already have Grammarly, if you have heard, which is kind of simplified the work of a technical editor to a certain extent by taking care of basic editing. But what we want to explore is, as editors, how do we move away from these mechanical checks? Right? And we all agree that as humans, we have more value to add than what an AI would do. I think these two are going to take us through how to go beyond these mechanical checks and add value to that whole editing process. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to our presentation. So a little bit about what we will be discussing or talking about today is, we won't be getting as much into the language aspect of editing, but the processes that we follow, some of the best practices that we recommend with the use of some practical examples, also some limitations and challenges that we face in our day-to-day job as technical editors. Yeah, so let's get started. So technical editing, there is no set definition for technical editing as such. So we have tried to split it into two. So technical is any specialized subject that has a target audience, its own terminology, jargon, and an objective approach. Then editing is a craft, and practicing a craft means recognizing and transcending its constraints. So what exactly do we mean by that? We look into it deeper. So editing is part of the writing process, and the writing process is split into 3 parts: drafting, editing, and proofreading. So what is the difference between these 3 interrelated processes, which are also separate? So first of all, drafting, this is where you actually write your content, put your ideas down on paper, so to speak, give it some coherent structure, and you will end up with multiple drafts or versions of your writing. And once you have a draft in place, you move into editing. So as you can see, editing is the biggest part of the writing process, also the most crucial. This is where you will apply all the 5 C's of editing that we call them: consistency, correctness, completeness, and so on. And just check the content for logic, structure, flow, and so on. So as the arrow suggests, there's a back and forth between these 2 stages. So once you have edited your draft, you go back into the drafting phase and apply all the edits and have a final draft ready. Then you move into the final stage, which is proofreading. This is where you will apply the finishing touches to your document, make it fit for publication, take care of the mechanical issues such as typos, grammar errors, and so on. One thing that once you move into proofreading, and this is where your document is ready for production, so there's no going back to editing or to drafting. So so coming to the most important question, and a very commonly occurring question that we get as editors is, do I need to edit my work? And the answer is a resounding yes. Yes, you do.
Okay, let's now look at the core job of a technical editor. So reading things and telling writers no is just a small part of our job. We certainly don't enjoy doing that mostly, but there is a lot more to this role, and in the following slides, we'll look at them in detail.
You want to control?
Thank you. So before we get to the what aspect of technical editing, let's just understand the why part of it. So technical editing is quality control for your technical communication. And it's only through technical editing that you can meet the customer's expectations for an error-free documentation. And hence, it is very important to have your documentation edited. We editors approach or evaluate the content using the 5 C's of editing. They are clarity, conciseness, consistency, correctness, and completeness. You can look at them as weapons that we use against the supervillains of bad documentation. Let us look at them one by one. When running a check for clarity, we see if active voice has been used. As we know, passive voice tends to make sentences longer, and the intended meaning gets lost in it. Another check is if the important information is placed right at the beginning of the sentence. Under conciseness, we see if short and simple sentences have been used. We ensure that each paragraph just talks about or discusses one single idea, and it has supportive and plus supportive statements for that idea and example. Because if you have too many ideas in one paragraph, it tends to just affect the comprehension of it, and it's very confusing for a reader to understand what exactly are you meaning in that particular paragraph. Another important check here is to condense verbose phrases, where we limit the word count per sentence. Under consistency, we scan the entire content for inconsistent style and formatting. Here, a deep knowledge of your style guide helps a lot, even for the editors and the writers, so that both can address this issue. Some places where you can run into consistency issues are in the presentation of your terminology, concepts, and definitions. Under correctness, we identify potential inaccuracies and problem areas. We also look at fixing the usage of confusing words and technical jargon. Finally, under completeness, we examine overall doc structure. Here, right from TOC to your individual topics, here one important aspect is to look at the headings, if they are fully and accurately describe the content. Because if the heading is not complete, you just don't get to the its content part. If you have looked at the backend of any grammar checking tool, you'll see that even there, the parameters to evaluate your documentation are these 5 C's. Hence, it is very important for writers to have a sound knowledge of these 5 C's so that they could implement them right at the writing stage. Next, let us look at the different levels or different types of edits. As you can see, there is a lot of overlap because that is how these edits work. No single type of edit can work in silo. Let us look at them one by one. First up, it is copy editing. It is at the core or base of all types of edits. You cannot have edits without this, and it is pretty common. Can anyone from the audience tell me what would you generally check under copy editing? It is quite common and famous. Yes, to some extent, but mostly it is language-related checks that we run. So the language is the crux of your writing. That is the first thing that a user will look at when reading your documentation. And in case you have errors at that level, then it just gives a bad impression for your documentation. Hence, in time of if there is a time crunch, we insist that at least they should, perform a copy edit. Next, we have the substantive editing. As the word suggests, we look at the substance here. There are three main things that we look at here. One is the technical correctness. For that, we do our own research about the product. We look at the product-specific style sheets that the writers maintain. If required, we also look at the Jira tickets created by the dev team so that we could understand the documentation there and give our feedback accordingly. Next, we have the developmental editing. If you look at it, I've used a small circle to describe it because it's a one-off case edit we generally get into it rarely. This is usually done for a new product documentation for which you're writing from the scratch, or for a newly acquired product doc where you are reshaping the documentation as per the parent company's norms. Here, we apply the principles of information architecture. We discuss concepts like content chunking and information mapping. Here we work hand in hand with the writer. If you look at the other two types of edits, substantive and copy editing, it is usually done, it is always done after the writer has written, but this is something that we work with the writer when they are writing it. So, also, we get into discussions about the scope of the documentation because we are defining everything about the documentation. Based on that, we evaluate the audience and the scope, and then we start the planning and organization of the documentation. So if you ever get a chance to work on a developmental editing, be part of it, it's a huge learning. I would urge everyone to take up that opportunity. Next, we have the production editing and the proofreading. So proofreading is more of a peer review setup where after a writer has written the documentation, it is given to another writer who would again proofread it or reread it mostly. But production editing is more a formal setup where the editor looks at all the things that they have checked under copy edit and substantive edit, and it's a thorough check. It's a proper checklist that we maintain, and then run the entire content by it. So in the beginning of the slide, I had said different levels of edits or different types of edits because they are both. You cannot, so if you see, it begins with copy edit, then you have a substantive and production editing. In case you get involved with development editing, that is again a mix of substantive, copy, and developmental. And the knowledge of these edits and its implementation is what makes us editors. This is our core skill that we look for in an editor.
So self-reviewing or evaluating your own content, this is in addition to your regular editorial reviews. So we have some recommendations that we give our teams of writers. First of all, running tool-based spell checks or grammar checks, checking the overall language in tools such as Grammarly, the inbuilt spell checker tool in MS Word, Google Docs, and all of those. Reason being that tools are able to catch mechanical issues with a higher level of accuracy and consistency as compared to a manual check. Solely because you might miss out on some things because your mind is trained to expect a certain kind of phrase or term over there. So reading aloud to yourself, this is a practice we've all been following ever since we were kids. So what this does is it helps us understand the flow of our content, whether it is flowing correctly, and if not, you can go back and fill in those gaps. Look for any ambiguous words and phrases. So these are often terms that might sound correct to you at the first stage, which is drafting. But when you go back and read it, you might find something that is not conveying the intended meaning as effectively as you thought. So that is one thing you can take care of in self-reviewing. Rereading your edited text. So once you've made all these adjustments, you can go back and read your text again. And this is where you might find some errors that you had missed initially, or new errors that were introduced by the tool, maybe. Finally, if you have the opportunity, let someone else read your content. There's a high possibility that someone else will be able to spot errors or issues that you may have missed. In this section, we will look at some practical examples and some best practices that we come across very often in technical documentation, and I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to some of these.
Okay, so the first best practice is to avoid over-documentation. Okay, raise your hands if you have come across similar documentation in a procedure where you have seen steps followed by step results. Okay, so the recommendation is to not have them because step results are pretty redundant. They're just there, right there on the screen for the user to look at. So the recommendation is to just state the steps.
Documenting obvious information or intuitive information only increases the bulk of the documentation and then affects the overall scannability or searchability of your content. So the idea here is to only give information that is adding value to your steps and remove anything that is intuitive to the user. For example, job name is the name of the job. So that is something that you can get rid of. So after you get rid of all the obvious or intuitive information, you're only left with a very concise and brief paragraph or sentence that is conveying only the required information.
So if you have if you understand how a wizard looks at, it is mostly pretty linear. It is click A, click B, click C. And it is pretty obvious. They're just there, right there. So the recommendation is to focus on why you're using that wizard and just state that. So you can just very well say, follow the wizard instructions to delete and save your changes. That is all that is required to it.
So in addition to the point that Rahul mentioned, information that should ideally belong on the UI, something that the user would want to access while they are working on the UI, should be mentioned on the UI and not in the documentation. So UI-specific information can be confirmation messages, privacy policy statements such as this one. So if you remove all of that, you're only left with this one simple sentence. Another example related to this is, so the note text highlighted in red, this is a requirement that should appear on the UI when the user is supposed to be entering all this information. So if we come across something like this, we open a discussion with the writer, sometimes with the engineering teams, to move this information on the UI in the form of tooltips or hover text. This is one of the most important slides that we have in our presentation, ensuring compliance with Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. So this is a federal law that mandates all agencies and vendors to make their information and communication technology accessible to people with disabilities. So what does VPAT mean? VPAT stands for a Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. That is a document that the vendor issues to the customers at the time of shipping the product, and it details how they have met all the requirements of Section 508. So we look at some of these requirements one by one. No. So use color schemes and contrast coordination. So for people in some disorders, color schemes can induce photosensitive seizures. So in such scenarios, the requirement is if your content uses images and colors, avoid using sharp contrasts or too bright color combinations. Avoid using color as the only distinguishing factor. You can use shape in addition to colors. Icon images should always have supporting label names, especially in running text when you're documenting instructions for the UI where you have to give an icon image. If you come across any icon that doesn't have a defined label in the UI, open a discussion with your product team and come up with a valid, relevant label name or a tooltip. Complex graphics, these are mostly architecture diagrams which are fairly complex. They should be supported with helpful descriptive documentation. Images and any interactive media should have alternative text defined. This is one of the requirements that was added in very recently with the advent of videos and all of that. So what does alternative text do? It describes the graphic in short and descriptive ways. So if someone is using a text-to-speech software or a read-aloud software, the alternative text reads the description back to this, to whoever is using this. Also in scenarios where the image is not loading properly, the alternative text will be there to give you proper information about what the image is. One thing we didn't add here was about videos. So if you are creating videos for your product, you can use closed captions and use readable audio transcripts.
So along with ensuring VPAT compliance, it is important to ensure GDPR compliance. GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, wants businesses to protect sensitive data or personal information such as email ID, address, and phone numbers. In case you have them on your screenshots or images, for example, if it is for a software for a patient page, and then you need to give that. So instead use a dummy profile instead of using an actual profile. Another check under this is for using internal IP addresses. Don't expose your company IP addresses. Instead use dummy IP addresses. You can find them in your style guides, or even your team would maintain a list of dummy IDs that you can use in your documentation.
Another important slide that we have is related to legal matters. Legal matters are central in technical environments. So ensuring compliance with legal requirements and protecting your company's data and documentation from any legal oversights is extremely crucial. And as editors, so the legal teams will often define their requirements about how the company trademarks are presented in customer-facing documentation. So what are trademarks exactly? Your company's trademarks are the company's products, services, the associated business units, and so on. In documentation, what we have to do with regards to trademarks is avoid using them in noun or verb forms. Always use trademarks as adjectives. We never use unapproved abbreviations or acronyms of trademarks. These have to be approved by your legal partners. Third-party trademarks, so these will always be used with express permission from the owners of these trademarks. And considering we already have all these permissions in place, these third-party owners will have their own style guidelines about the usage. So adhering to these guidelines in terms of the casing that you use, the spelling, hyphenation, all of that has to be has to conform with the trademark owner's guidelines. Another thing about third-party trademarks, so in software or product documentation, you might have to document instructions to download third-party software. So in such scenarios, we have to ensure that the proper disclaimers about the use of such trademarks and these products are mentioned closer to these instructions that you're documenting. We should, finally, plagiarism. So finally, we should always use original content. Write your own documentation text. Avoid copying any third-party documentation or using it verbatim. This is the last one, but very important.
Finally, the final best practice is to prepare a list of check of all the things that we have discussed till now. Right from your template checks to your language checks, all your compliance related and legal checks. Very important product specific checks. I would urge everyone to maintain a product specific checks. It is the reference for your editors. In case there are multiple writers working on a single documentation, it's very helpful for them as well.
Okay. So we just wanted to end this presentation with some of our learnings and challenges. So it's not always smooth sailing. So let's look at some of them. So as editors, we are not always looking at the content, reading the content and providing our feedback. We also have additional responsibilities, often cross-team coordination. So we work closely with legal teams, sometimes with the UX teams. Some editors will also be admins for the authoring tools that your company is using. Some editors will also be part of information architecture, so they will be involved with organizing and structuring content. Involvement of technology. So as we discussed, automation of editing tasks such as use of spell checkers, grammar checkers, language checkers, these are all good things as they help us manage our tasks well. They reduce the amount of manual checks. However, tools are not fully reliable, right? They can sometimes face issues. And in such cases, all of these checks become manual checks. So editing and the team of editors, it's a niche skill set. So the ratio between writers and editors will never be equal. So the amount of tasks will often outnumber the number of editors that you have. Tied into that are ad hoc tasks. These are tasks that are last-minute requirements. These pop up maybe towards the end of your release cycle, but they are equally important, and they have to undergo the correct review processes. But yeah, they can be very challenging. By changing demands, so as editors, we have to adapt to different styles of working. So we, depending on the work style that the product team is following, we have to adapt to that and manage or change our style or approach accordingly. So sometimes we might be following an agile process, sometimes it will be an iteration. Finally, the turnaround time is impacted by all the factors that we have just mentioned about. So the volume of tasks, the number of ad hoc tasks, the dependencies on the tools, all of these will determine the turnaround time, whether slower or quicker.
So let's quickly look at the takeaways from the presentation. Editorial reviews are important and add value to your content. Good self-review forms a solid base for your quality editorial review. Following best practices help in streamlining your work. It is important to make your content accessible and readable. Legal compliance is central in technical environments. So in the end, all we would like to say is that we editors are the QA for language and meaning. It's our job to aggregate information, parse it, restructure it, and ensure it meets standards. So thank you.